Which brings us to the final, fatal stage of psychological control. Total physical isolation. This is the tragic culmination in the jungles of Guyana.
Jonestown,
Yeah.
the promised land. The socialist utopia supposedly free from racism and fascism. But let's look at the grim physical reality of what this place actually was, as detailed in the sources.
It was nothing like a utopia.
Not at all. Jim Jones leased a 4,000-acre tract of dense swamp from the Guyanese government for 25 cents an acre.
25 cents?
Yeah. And the only reason it was so incredibly cheap was because the land was completely unsuited for large-scale agriculture.
And its location was political.
Right. Crucially, it was strategically placed right on a disputed, highly volatile border with Venezuela. The Guyanese government essentially used the American members of the People's Temple as a human shield against a potential Venezuelan military invasion.
So the followers stepped off the plains expecting a tropical paradise and instead stepped into a brutal, unforgiving labor camp.
A literal labor camp.
They were forced to work from 6:30 in the morning to 6 in the evening in blistering equatorial heat, clearing jungle with hand tools.
And they were starving.
Because the soil was so incredibly poor, they simply couldn't grow enough crops to sustain 1,000 people. The diet rapidly devolved to just rice and gravy, occasionally flavored with weeds or small amounts of vegetables.
Which destroyed their health.
It led to severe, rampant malnutrition, weight loss, and chronic diarrhea for the vast majority of the followers.
But not for Jones, right?
Yeah. Meanwhile, Jones lived comfortably in a separate air-conditioned cottage, eating imported meats and cheese and heavily abusing pharmaceutical drugs.
And let's not forget the logistical trap. The moment they arrived in Guyana, their passports, their return tickets, and their personal medications were confiscated by the leadership.
They were physically trapped.
Leaving wasn't just psychologically difficult anymore due to the sunk cost fallacy. It was geographically and legally impossible. They were surrounded by miles of dense, impenetrable jungle. Even if you managed to sneak past the armed guards, where would you go?
You have no money, no passport, and you are in a foreign country.
This absolute, total physical isolation allowed Jones to perfect his information control. He became the sole, uncontested source of truth for nearly 1,000 people.
The loudspeaker system.
Yes, the sources describe him sitting on an elevated throne in the main pavilion, speaking endlessly over a camp-wide loudspeaker system that played 24 hours a day.
Just a constant stream of his voice.
He would read to the camp from American newspapers, but he wasn't reading the actual news. He was completely inventing it on the spot.
He told his starving followers that the United States had completely fallen to a fascist military dictatorship.
He claimed that minorities and political dissidents were being actively rounded up and put into concentration camps, and that the Ku Klux Klan was marching openly in the streets, taking over the government infrastructure.
Consider the psychological impact of that. If you are sitting in the mud, starving, sweating, exhausted, and suffering from dysentery, he is warping your reality so severely that the hellish jungle camp still seems safer than your own home country.
You literally think, yes, I am hungry, but at least I am not in a fascist concentration camp.
By controlling the information flow, he completely controlled their perception of reality. And once he had them entirely cut off from the truth, he began conditioning them for the end.
The White Knights.
The phenomena of the White Knights.
The White Knight drills are perhaps the most chilling example of psychological conditioning in the entire historical record.
They are horrific to read about.
The sources detail these events where Jones would sound the camp-wide sirens in the middle of the night. He would wake the entire exhausted camp, assemble them in the pavilion, and frantically declare that the CIA, the Guyanese military, or mercenaries hired by their relatives, were actively marching through the jungle to torture the adults and butcher the children.
Creating absolute panic.
He would whip them into a state of sheer panic, and then he would force everyone to drink from a vat of liquid that he claimed was a lethal poison.
He told them the only way to escape the impending torture was to die on their own terms.
So they would drink it.
They would drink the liquid, say their agonizing final goodbyes to their children and spouses, sit down in the dirt, and wait to die.
God, that's just...
And then, an hour later, Jones would smile and announce, "It was just a test of your loyalty. You are safe."
It's so...
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is the ultimate mechanized psychological conditioning. By repeatedly forcing the congregation to face the absolute terror of death and then pulling them back from the brink, the followers became completely desensitized to the act of taking their own lives.
It normalized it.
Death was reframed. Over months of these drills, it was no longer viewed as a tragic end or a terrifying unknown. Jones framed it as an act of revolutionary suicide.
Revolutionary suicide. Yeah.
He convinced them that dying together was the ultimate expression of loyalty to their socialist cause, a final protest against a cruel, capitalist, racist world. It became a perverse badge of honor.
Okay, let's unpack how this pressure cooker finally exploded, because it requires an external catalyst. The breaking point was the visit from United States Congressman Leo Ryan in November 1978.
The concerned relatives.
Right, family members back in the U.S., a group calling themselves the Concerned Relatives, had put so much political and media pressure on the government regarding the human rights abuses in Jonestown that Congressman Ryan flew down to Guyana to investigate personally.
And when he first arrived at the jungle compound, for a fleeting moment, the facade held.
It really did. The People's Temple put on a show.
The people danced, they sang, they put on a massive, joyous musical concert. Ryan even took the microphone that night and announced to the crowd, "There are some people here who believe this is the best thing that ever happened to them," which was met with thunderous applause.
But you cannot suppress the human survival instinct entirely, no matter how much sleep deprivation or fear you apply.
It's impossible to crush it in everyone.
During the festivities, a member named Vernon Gosney managed to secretly pass a note to one of Congressman Ryan's aides.
That note changed everything.
The note didn't contain a long manifesto. It simply begged for help escaping. It listed a few names of people who desperately wanted to leave.
When that illusion shattered the next morning, the reality of Jonestown broke wide open. Ryan announced that he would offer safe passage on his planes to anyone who wanted to return to the United States.
Suddenly, the floodgates cracked. Dozens of people nervously stepped forward, asking to leave.
And Jim Jones completely panicked.
He lost control.
His absolute control, the narcissist's ultimate drug, was publicly breaking in front of a U.S. government official. The resulting violence at the nearby Port Katuma airstrip was the point of no return.
What happened at the airstrip?
Jones sent a tractor-trailer loaded with his elite armed guards, the Red Brigade, to ambush the planes as they were boarding. They opened fire, murdering Congressman Ryan, who was actually the only U.S. congressman assassinated in the line of duty, along with several journalists and a fleeing defector.
And there was a loyalist on the plane too, right?
Yes. What's even more chilling is the psychological grip Jones still had. One of his loyalists, Larry Layton, had pretended to be a defector, boarded the smaller Cessna plane with the other escapees, and started shooting the people inside point blank once the doors closed.
So back at the Jonestown Pavilion, the trap was snapping shut. Jones knew that the brazen murder of a United States congressman would bring the full force of the American and Guyanese militaries down upon the compound within hours.
There was no more running.
He initiated the final white knight. And we know exactly what happened step by step because Jones, in his ultimate narcissistic vision, recorded it.
A death tape.
The death tape is a 44-minute audio recording of the massacre. And what is absolutely vital to understand here, to finally put the nail in the coffin of the brainwashed cult member myth, is that it wasn't a peaceful, unanimous, zombie-like decision.
No, not at all.
Even at the very end, amidst the terror, the screaming children, and the armed guards, there was fierce resistance. The sources highlight a courageous woman named Christine Miller.
She is a hero in this story.
She actively, vocally argued with Jim Jones on the tape. She stood up in front of the entire terrified congregation and argued for life. She said, "As long as there's life, there's hope."
She suggested airlifting the congregation to Russia, fleeing into the jungle, doing absolutely anything but dying.
Her voice on that tape proves that the human will to survive, the innate logic of a mother wanting her child to live, was still fighting fiercely against years of systemic brainwashing.
But her objections were methodically drowned out, not just by Jones, but by the collective conditioned pressure of the crowd, who had been taught over countless white nights to view her desire to live as treasonous cowardice.
Which is devastating.
And let's be explicitly clear about the mechanical reality of the tragedy. Surrounded by the Red Brigade armed with crossbows and rifles, facing the agonizing reality of their infants and children being poisoned first, often with syringes of cyanide-laced flavor aids squirted directly into the backs of their throats, the trap was absolute.
They had no physical way out.
None. To call it a mass suicide is a historical inaccuracy. For hundreds of them, particularly the 300 children, the elderly, and those who were forcibly injected against their will when they refused to drink, it was a mass murder.
As we synthesize this incredibly heavy, complex history, I want to speak directly to you, the listener. The tragedy of Jonestown is not a story about monsters and fools.
It's not.
The people who died in that jungle were victims of their own best intentions. Their profound, beautiful desire for a fair, equal, genuinely loving world was systematically hijacked by a malignant narcissist who weaponized their empathy against them.
He used their hope as the ultimate trap.
He took their desire for justice and twisted it into a cage of paranoia and death.
And that is the most crucial, urgent lesson to bring into the present day. The psychological vulnerabilities that Jim Jones exploited are not relics of the 1970s.
Definitely not.
They are not confined to jungle compounds or obscure religious sects. The fear of a hostile outside world, the profound desire for belonging and purpose, the willingness to ignore glaring red flags in exchange for a sense of moral superiority, safety, or community. These are fundamentally, eternally human traits.
We see them all the time.
We see echoes of these exact same manipulative tactics in modern echo chambers, in extreme political polarization, in high-demand corporate cultures, and in radicalized groups online today.
The mechanics are the same.
The mechanics of isolation, financial control, and information manipulation haven't disappeared. They have just evolved from loudspeakers in a jungle to digital algorithms and curated feeds.
And that is exactly why we can't just build imaginary fences around these historical tragedies. We have to look at them closely, understand the mechanics of the trap, and recognize the humanity of the people caught in it.
We have to relate to them.
So, as you go about your week, navigating an increasingly complex and polarized world, I want to leave you with a lingering question to mull over.
What's the question?
If the most dangerous traps in human history are so often paved with our highest ideals, and if predators disguise themselves as saviors, how do we distinguish between a leader who truly wants to build a better world and one who just wants to own it?
It is a question that requires constant, vigilant, critical thinking from all of us.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the sources. Keep questioning the world around you, keep looking for the truth beneath the surface, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.